Apache warrior protected a white woman, only to discover she carried his brother's child. He saved his enemy's pregnant wife from certain death in the desert, never knowing she carried his own brother's child. This is the story of an Apache warrior who discovered that sometimes the greatest battles are fought not with weapons, but with the choice between revenge and mercy. What happened next will break your heart and restore your faith in humanity. The morning sun bled across the Arizona sky like a wound that would not heal. Aiyana pressed her hand against the swell of her belly and forced one foot in front of the other, leaving a trail of broken dreams in the red dust behind her. The smoke still rose from what had been her home. Timber and hope reduced to ash, scattered by the desert wind like prayers no one would answer. Her husband's blood had already dried black on her dress. Thomas lay beneath the burning beams of their cabin, his gentle hands that once carved her name in cottonwood bark, now still forever. The Apache raiders had come with the dawn, their war cries splitting the morning like thunder. But they had not taken her. Perhaps they thought her too heavy with child to survive the desert. Perhaps they thought the sun would finish what their bullets had started. She stumbled, caught herself against a barrel cactus, felt the thorns bite through her sleeve. The baby moved restlessly inside her, as if sensing the danger that surrounded them both. 8 months she had carried this child. 8 months of watching Thomas's face soften every time he felt the little one kick. Now that face would never smile again, never whisper promises to the son or daughter he would never hold. "Keep walking," she whispered to herself, the words cracking like old leather in her throat. Just keep walking. But the desert stretched endless before her, a sea of red rock and thorned silence that could swallow a woman whole. The nearest settlement lay 2 days' ride to the south, if she knew which way was south. If she could walk 2 days without water. If the child inside her would wait that long to be born. From the shadow of a mesa, eyes watched her struggle. Nahale had seen the smoke from 5 miles away. His painted pony shifted restlessly beneath him as he studied the burning homestead through the heat shimmer. Another white family driven from Apache land. Another victory his people would count when they gathered around evening fires. But the taste of victory had turned bitter in his mouth 3 days ago, when he rode back to find his own village nothing but blackened poles and silent graves. The cavalry had come in the night. Blue coats seeking vengeance for raids they could not stop, killing women and children who had never held a weapon. His mother's body lay cold beside the cooking fire she would never tend again. His grandfather, the keeper of old stories, had died with a soldier's bullet in his chest and ancient words still on his lips. Now this white woman stumbled through his homeland, carrying new life in her womb, while death followed her like a shadow. He should ride away. Let the desert claim another settler, another reminder of the people who had stolen Apache hunting grounds and called it progress. His war paint still marked his cheeks, red clay mixed with grief, black charcoal mixed with rage. But something in the way she moved stopped him. She did not curse the sun or shake her fist at the empty sky. She simply walked, one hand on her belly, protecting the child within even as her own strength faded with each step. There was no hatred in her face, only the quiet determination of a mother who would die before she let her baby die first. Nahale's horse stamped, sensing his confusion. The warrior code was clear. Enemies deserved no mercy, no protection. But older laws lived in his blood, laws written before the first white man ever saw Apache land. Laws that said a woman with child belonged to life itself, not to war. He dismounted and followed her at a distance, staying in the shadows of red rock and scrub oak. She walked for another hour before her legs gave out. He watched her fall to her knees in the sand, watched her try 3 times to stand before she accepted that her body had nothing left to give. The vultures began to circle. Nahale emerged from the rocks like a ghost made flesh. The woman's head snapped up, her blue eyes wide with terror as she took in his war paint, his rifle, the scalps hanging from his belt, trophies of other white men who had not lived to see another sunset. "Please," she whispered, her hands clutching her belly. Not the baby. Please, not the baby. He stopped 10 feet away, his rifle loose in his hands. Up close, he could see the exhaustion carved into her face, the way her lips had cracked from thirst, the blood on her dress that belonged to someone else. She was young, maybe 20 summers, with hair the color of autumn wheat and eyes that held no bitterness, only fear for the child she carried. Water, he said in English, the word strange on his tongue. He pointed toward a canyon hidden in the mesa shadow. Water there. She stared at him as if he had spoken in tongues. Perhaps he had. Perhaps mercy was a language neither of their peoples remembered how to speak. But the baby moved again, and something older than hatred stirred in Nahale's chest. His own brother had been taken by cavalry soldiers when they were boys, stolen away to be raised white. Sometimes, in dreams, he still heard Tahzay calling his name across the years. This woman-child would not die because adults could not remember how to make peace. The sun climbed higher, and the desert held its breath, waiting to see what choice a warrior would make when war painted his face, but humanity painted his heart. In the silence between heartbeats, between one step and the next, the threads of two shattered lives began to weave together, though neither yet understood the pattern fate was making of their pain. The Apache warrior brought her water every morning at dawn, but each time he looked at her face, he saw the ghost of someone he thought was lost forever. The hidden canyon held secrets older than memory. Red walls rose like cathedral spires toward a ribbon of sky, sheltering a pool of spring water that had never known drought. Ancient handprints marked the stone, Apache ancestors who had sought refuge in this same place when the world grew too heavy to carry alone. Aiyana sat in the shade of an overhanging ledge, watching Nahale gather desert willow bark with movements precise as prayer. 3 days had passed since he led her to this sanctuary, 3 days of slow understanding built on gestures and careful silences. He spoke little English, and she knew no Apache words, but need was a language they both understood. The baby pressed against her ribs, restless in the growing heat. She shifted, trying to find comfort on the blanket Nahale had woven from yucca fibers, rough but clean, smelling of sage and something else she couldn't name. Safety, perhaps. She had not felt safe since Thomas died. Water, Nahale said, returning with a gourd cup filled from spring. His third English word, after safe and rest. He offered it with both hands, the Apache way, as if water were something sacred. Perhaps, in this land of thorns and endless sky, it was. She drank slowly, tasting the mineral sweetness of deep earth. When she finished, he took the cup and refilled it without being asked. This too had become ritual, the offering, the acceptance, the quiet moment when their eyes met before looking away. He had washed the war paint from his face on the first day. Without it, she could see he was younger than she had thought, maybe 25 summers, with high cheekbones and eyes the color of obsidian. A thin scar ran from his left temple to his jaw, some old battle she would never know the story of. But his hands, when he helped her stand or brought her food, were gentle as her father's had been when she was small. "Thomas," she said suddenly, surprising herself. She had not spoken her husband's name since the morning he died. "My husband, Thomas Whitehorse." Nahale's head turned sharply. Something flickered in his dark eyes, recognition, maybe, or confusion. He repeated the name slowly, as if tasting each syllable. "Thomas Whitehorse." He was a good man. The words came easier now, like water from a deep well. He carved toys for the baby. Little horses liked the name. Said our child would learn to ride before he learned to walk. She touched her belly, feeling movement beneath her palm. The baby seemed to quiet when she spoke of Thomas, as if listening to stories of the father who would never hold him. Nahale watched her with an intensity that made her skin warm. There was something familiar in the way he tilted his head when concentrating, something that reminded her of. But no, that was impossible. Grief played tricks on a woman's mind, made her see ghosts in every shadow. "Horse," Nahale said carefully, pointing to where his painted pony grazed among the canyon grasses. "Apache," He spoke a word that sounded like wind through stone. Whitehorse. Thomas. He was trying to understand, she realized, trying to connect her husband's name to something in his own language. It touched her in a way she hadn't expected, this effort to bridge the space between their worlds. Yes, she nodded. He loved horses, said they were the freest things in creation. The afternoon light shifted, painting the canyon walls gold and amber. Nahale rose and walked to his pack, returning with strips of dried meat and a handful of pine nuts. He had been feeding her better than he fed himself. She noticed how his ribs showed more sharply each day, how his face had grown lean with careful rationing. "You eat too," she said, pushing half the meat back toward him. "Baby needs you strong too." Something passed between them then, not quite understanding, but acknowledgement. They were bound together and now, by necessity, by the child who demanded protection from a world gone mad with war. Neither had chosen this connection, but both had accepted its weight. As evening came, Nahale built a small fire against the canyon wall. The flames danced between them, casting moving shadows on ancient stone. In the firelight, Aiyana studied his profile and felt that strange familiarity again. The angle of his jaw, the way he held his shoulders, the careful grace of his movements. Thomas had moved like that sometimes, she remembered, when he thought no one was watching, when some old memories surfaced from the depths of his past. He had never spoken much about his childhood, only that he'd been orphaned young and taken in by the cavalry. But sometimes, in quiet moments, she caught glimpses of something else, a wildness he kept carefully hidden, a knowledge of desert ways that book learning couldn't teach. "Where you come from?" she asked Nahale. "Your family?" His face grew still. He stared into the fire for a long moment before answering. "All gone," he said simply. "Soldiers kill. Family gone." The pain in his voice cut through her like a blade. She wanted to reach out, to offer comfort, but the space between them still held too much history, too much fear. Instead, she spoke the only truth she knew. "I'm sorry." He looked at her then, really looked, and she saw her own grief reflected in his eyes. Two people orphaned by the same endless war, sheltering together in a place their ancestors might have shared in better times. The fire burned lower. The baby settled into sleep, and gradually, so did the desert around them. But Aiyana lay awake long after Nahale's breathing grew deep and even, staring up at stars that seemed close enough to touch. In 3 days, he had given her water, food, shelter, protection. He had asked for nothing in return except the strange comfort of shared silence. She had been taught to fear his kind, to see them as savages without souls. But this man who sat guard while she slept, who rationed his own food to keep her child alive, this man had more honor than half the white settlers she had known. The baby stirred, and she whispered a prayer into the desert night, not for rescue or revenge, but for understanding. For the grace to see past the color of skin to the shape of a human heart. Tomorrow would bring new light to the canyon walls, and with it, words that would shatter the fragile peace they had built in the space between yesterday's enemies and tomorrow's truth. When she whispered her dead husband's real name by the fire, the Apache warrior's blood turned to ice, because that name belonged to the brother soldiers had stolen from him 12 years ago. The fire had burned low to coals when the truth came walking out of the past like a ghost with unfinished business. Aiyana shifted against the canyon wall, her hand tracing circles on her swollen belly as the baby turned restlessly inside her. The desert night pressed close around them, full of cricket's song and the distant cry of a hunting owl. "He wasn't always Thomas Whitehorse," she said quietly, her voice barely louder than the whisper of wind through stone. "That wasn't the name he was born with." Nahale's hand froze halfway to the fire, a piece of dried wood forgotten in his grip. Something cold crawled up his spine, the feeling a man gets when he walks over his own grave. "The cavalry found him when he was just a boy," Aiyana continued, unaware of the stillness that had seized her protector. "Maybe 8 years old, wandering alone in the desert after Apache raiders killed his family. Or that's what they told him. What they told everyone." The wood fell from Nahale's fingers, landing in the coals with a shower of sparks that rose toward the stars like prayers that would never be answered. They gave him a new name, raised him as their own. But sometimes, late at night when he thought I was sleeping, I'd hear him talking in his dreams. Strange words that didn't sound like any English I knew. And he'd call out. She paused, her voice catching on memory. He'd call out for someone named Nahale. The warrior's world tilted sideways. Blood roared in his ears like a flash flood tearing through dry arroyos. The name hung in the air between them. His own name, spoken by a woman who had never known him, carried in the dreams of a man he had mourned as dead. Tahzay, he whispered, the word torn from somewhere deeper than his throat. Aiyana's head turned sharply. Even in the dim firelight, he could see her eyes widen as recognition bloomed like a terrible flower in the space between heartbeats. "You know that name?" she breathed. Nahale rose unsteadily to his feet, his legs weak as a newborn colt's. 12 years collapsed into nothing. 12 years of believing his little brother lay bleaching in the desert sun. 12 years of carrying guilt like a stone in his chest for not protecting the boy who had trusted him to keep the monsters away. "Tahzay," he said again, and this time the name came out like a prayer and a curse rolled into one. "My brother. My little brother." The canyon walls seemed to lean inward, pressing the truth down on them like a weight too heavy for human hearts to bear. Aiyana struggled to her feet, one hand against the stone for support, the other cradling the child who would never know his father. "Thomas was Apache," she said, her voice hollow with understanding. "He was your brother. The cavalry took him." Nahale's words came in broken pieces, like a dam giving way under too much pressure. "We were hunting rabbits. I went to set snares by the water. When I came back, blood everywhere. My parents, grandparents, all dead. But no Tahzay. Just gone." He turned away from her, his shoulders shaking with the force of memories he had buried so deep they had turned to stone. An 8-year-old boy calling his name across the desert. Small hands reaching for him as horses carried his brother toward a life that would steal everything Apache from his bones, everything that made him Tahzay instead of Thomas. "I looked for him," Nahale continued, his voice raw as a wound. "Followed the horse tracks for 3 days. But they crossed into cavalry territory, and I was just a boy. The elders said he was dead. Better to be dead than raised by white soldiers, they said. Better to die Apache than live as something else." Aiyana pressed her hand to her mouth, stifling a sound that might have been a sob or a laugh or both. The cruel mathematics of it all. How she had lost a husband and gained a brother-in-law in the same moment. How the child she carried was both orphan and nephew. How the man who had saved her life was the same man her husband had called for in dreams. "He remembered you," she said finally. "Even after all those years, all that distance, he remembered. He used to wake up crying sometimes, reaching for someone who wasn't there." The fire crackled, sending shadows dancing across the ancient handprints on the canyon walls. Apache ancestors who had sheltered here, who had faced their own impossible choices, their own broken worlds. "Did he?" Nahale's voice broke. He cleared his throat and tried again. Was he happy? Before? Such a simple question. Such a terrible one to answer. "He was gentle," Aiyana said carefully. "Kinda animals, kinda me. He worked hard, never raised his voice in anger. But sometimes I'd catch him staring at the horizon like he was looking for something he'd lost. And he knew things, which plants were safe to eat, how to read weather and cloud shapes, how to move through the desert without leaving tracks. I thought he'd learned it from old cavalry scouts, but Apache blood remembers what the mind forgets," Nahale finished. They stood in silence, separated by the width of the dying fire, but connected by bonds stronger than blood. Grief, loss, the terrible weight of truth finally spoken aloud. The baby moved inside Aiyana, a flutter of life in a moment heavy with death and revelation. "The child," Nahale said suddenly. "Tahzay's child. My brother's son, or daughter." Aiyana's hand moved protectively over her belly. "Thomas hoped for a daughter. Said the world needed more gentle souls." Nahale looked at her then, really looked and saw not the enemy he had been raised to hate, but his brother's beloved wife. The woman who had carried Tahzay's heart through the last years of his life. The mother of the only piece of his brother that would survive the grave. He loved you, Nahale said. It wasn't a question. With everything he had, tears tracked down her cheeks like silver in the firelight. Even when he couldn't remember his own name, he remembered how to love. The owl called again, closer now. Night hunters moving through the darkness, following trails older than human memory. In the distance, coyotes sang their ancient songs to stars that had watched countless generations of joy and sorrow play out beneath their light. I killed the men who killed him, Nahale said quietly. Aiyana's breath caught. What? The raiders who burned your home. I tracked them down after I brought you here. Made them pay in Apache blood for Apache crimes. She stared at him, this warrior who had avenged her husband's death while protecting her life, who had shown her mercy while showing her husband's killers none. The complexity of it all, justice and forgiveness, loyalty and betrayal, love and hate, tangled together like thorned vines around her heart. Why? She whispered. Nahale's answer came from somewhere deeper than words, from the place where souls touch across the vast distances that separate one heart from another. Because he was my brother, and you are my brother's wife. The fire died to embers, but neither moved to rebuild it. They stood in the growing darkness, two people bound together by loss and blood and the cruel mathematics of fate, while somewhere in the desert night, the ghost of Tahzay Whitehorse finally found peace. In the ashes of old truths, new bonds were forged, fragile as morning frost, strong as the mountains that had watched over Apache land since time began turning. The Apache warrior delivered his brother's son with his own hands, and in that moment, two broken peoples found a bridge built of love instead of war. The baby came with the dawn, 3 days south of the canyon where ghosts had finally found their peace. Aiyana's labor began as the first light touched the cottonwoods along a shallow creek, water running clear over smooth stones, heading toward the Rio Grande and eventually the sea. Nahale had chosen this place carefully. The trees offered shade and shelter. The water ran clean and sweet. Most important, they were only half a day's ride from the Mexican border, where a woman with a mixed blood child might find acceptance, or at least tolerance enough to build a quiet life. The baby comes now, Aiyana gasped, gripping the trunk of a massive cottonwood as another wave of pain rolled through her. Her dress was soaked with sweat despite the cool morning air. I can feel, oh God, I can feel the head. Nahale had delivered foals and calves, but never a human child. His hand shook as he spread Thomas's old coat on the ground, creating the cleanest bed he could manage. Everything he knew about birthing came from watching Apache women help each other through labor, knowledge he had never expected to use. Breathe slow, he said in English, then repeated it in Apache, the old words coming easier now that he knew who would hear them. Child wants to see the world. We help him come safe. Aiyana managed a weak smile between contractions. So sure it's a boy? Feel like boy. Nahale knelt beside her, his hands gentle but certain. Strong. Impatient. Like his father was. Another contraction seized her, stronger this time. She bore down, her fingers digging into the earth, connecting herself to the land that had sheltered them both. The sun climbed higher, painting the cottonwood leaves gold and green, while somewhere in the branches above them, a mockingbird ran through its repertoire of borrowed songs. I can see him, Nahale whispered, wonder replacing fear in his voice. Dark hair. Big head like Tahzay had. The baby came all at once, slippery and purple and howling his displeasure being thrust into a world of cold air and bright light. Nahale caught him with sure hands, this tiny bridge between worlds, this living proof that love could survive the death of everything around it. A son, he said, his voice thick with emotion. Your son. Tahzay is son. Aiyana reached for the baby with trembling arms. The child quieted when she held him against her chest, his unfocused eyes searching her face as if memorizing the features of the person who had carried him through fire and loss into the light. "He's beautiful," she whispered, tears streaming down her cheeks. "Oh, Thomas, he's so beautiful." Nahale cleaned the baby with water from the stream, his warrior's hands surprisingly gentle as he wrapped the child in soft deerskin he had prepared for this moment. The boy, and he was unmistakably a boy, had skin the color of river sand, hair black as a raven's wing, and eyes that seemed to hold depths too old for a newborn. "He has her husband's nose," Nahale observed, settling beside them in the dappled shade. "But his grandfather's eyes. Apache eyes that see far." "What was your grandfather's name?" Aiyana asked. "Tahzay never spoke of his family, but sometimes I caught him carving symbols in wood. Old symbols that looked like mountains and eagles." "Aiyana," Nahale said softly, "means rain falling. He could call storms with his songs," the elders said. "Died fighting cavalry when Tahzay and I were small." The baby stirred against Aiyana's breast, making soft sounds that were neither cry nor contentment. She looked down at him, this child who carried the blood of two peoples who had spent generations teaching their children to hate each other. "Samuel," she said suddenly. "Samuel Tahzay. English name for the white world, Apache name for his father's people." Nahale nodded slowly. The name felt right on his tongue, familiar yet new, like sunrise over land you've never seen, but somehow remember from dreams. "Samuel Tahzay," he repeated. "Two names for a boy who will walk between two worlds." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the baby sleep. Around them, the cottonwoods whispered ancient secrets to the morning breeze. A red-tailed hawk circled overhead, riding thermals toward the endless blue. Life continued its eternal dance, indifferent to human borders and the wars that carved such sharp lines between hearts that should beat as one. "What happens now?" Aiyana asked finally. Nahale had been thinking about that question for 3 days, ever since truth had redrawn the map of their lives. He could return to what remained of his people, tell them about his brother's son, try to find place for a white woman in Apache life. But that path led only to more pain, more division, more children caught between worlds that refused to meet. "There is a town," he said carefully, "Tres Cruces, across the border. People there ask few questions about the past. You can make life there. Safe life for Samuel. And you." The question he had been avoiding settled between them like a bird that might fly away or might stay forever. "Apache way says child belongs to mother's clan," Nahale said slowly, "but also says uncle has duty to teach boy the old ways. How to track, how to read sign, how to move with honor through a world that will try to break his spirit." Aiyana studied his face, seeing the longing he tried to hide. This man who had already lost one brother, one family, one entire way of life. The thought of losing connection to Tahzay's son must cut him deeper than desert wind cuts rock. "You could come with us," she said quietly. "Not as Apache, not as enemy. As family." The word hung in the air like a bridge neither dared to cross. Family. The thing that war had stolen from both of them, offered back by a baby who knew nothing of hatred, nothing of the reasons grown people gave for killing each other. People in town, they see Apache warrior with white woman. Nahale shook his head. "Bring trouble for you, for Samuel. Then don't be a warrior." Aiyana's voice grew stronger, more certain. "Be an uncle. Be the man who teaches a boy about both sides of his blood. Be the bridge Thomas always wanted to be, but never could." The baby woke, hungry and demanding. As Aiyana nursed him, Nahale watched the play of light through leaves, the endless motion of water over stones, the way new life asserted itself against all odds. Maybe she was right. Maybe there was room in this torn world for people who refused to choose sides, who insisted on being whole instead of broken. "Samuel will need to know his father's stories," he said finally. "Both his father's stories," Aiyana corrected. "The white man who loved me, and the Apache boy who dreamed of home." As if sensing the weight of his inheritance, baby Samuel opened his eyes and looked directly at Nahale. For a moment, The warrior saw his brother's face looking back at him. Not lost anymore, not stolen, but transformed into something new and precious and full of possibility. Uncle Nahale will teach you, he promised the baby. Teach you to walk proud in both worlds, to see with Apache eyes and white eyes, to be bridge instead of wall. The sun climbed toward noon, and slowly they prepared to leave this place where a new family had been born from the ashes of old grief. Nahale helped Aiyana onto his horse, the baby secure in her arms. Together they rode south, toward a border that existed on maps, but not in the heart of a child who would grow up knowing that love was stronger than the lines people drew to keep each other apart. Behind them, the cottonwoods whispered blessings to the wind. Ahead, the road wound toward tomorrow and all the tomorrows after that. Between them rode three people bound not by blood alone, but by choice, the choice to heal instead of harm, to build instead of destroy, to believe that somewhere in the space between what was and what could be, peace was always possible. In the end, the desert kept its secrets, but gave up its gifts. Water to the thirsty, shade to the weary, and hope to those brave enough to believe that even the deepest wounds might someday learn to heal.